Brilliant. Thank you, Jonas, and thank you, IB, for your leadership in this space and for inviting me in. I genuinely feel very privileged to have your time and talk you through our little story, as Jonas said, about My Net Zero. Help I'm Lost is actually very kind of appropriate to the sustainability world. I kind of really feel like if anyone out there tells you they know everything about what we need to do to protect the planet moving forwards, you know, they're probably overselling themselves. We all need to learn from each other. We all need to step forwards in a collaborative way to do all that we can to do what we need to do. Now, I'm going to tell you the story of My Net Zero. I'm the founder. We're only a couple of years old. We're a startup. And it's going to be based around this theme of closing the emissions gap. So I don't know if anyone knows too much about what the emissions gap is. The emissions gap is, well, think about it this way. So governments all around the world are taking action, which is a good thing, right? Some better than others. We know where we've been here in Australia. The IPCC, the Paris Agreement, and the system of COP each year is a conference in September or October each year where all the governments come together. They are rungs of the ladder that pull governments forward to increase their commitments and start taking action. Now, there's too much politics in that. Corporates all around the world are taking action. There's over 5,000 corporates now signed up to what's called the SBTI, which is the science-based target initiatives. And they are tracked and measured and regulated and reported and all those sorts of things. And yes, greenwashing is still around, but I tell you what, regulations are coming to Australia soon in this next financial year, and they will drip feed from the biggest businesses down to the smaller businesses. And that's a good thing. But the reality is every pledge from every corporate and every government around the world, even if they are delivered to a T, is not delivering anywhere near enough to do what we need to do as a planet to have a sustainable future on this planet as humans. The planet will be fine, by the way. I was very lucky to be on a glacier in New Zealand with a scientist in January, and he said, "Don't worry about the planet. The planet will look after itself. It's our ability to live on this planet is the challenge." And so the emissions gap is that gap. It's the pledges that we've currently got in place and the work that we actually need to do to get to net zero as a planet. And my take on that is that individuals around the world, well, it's a human-induced problem, but we're not individually responsible, but we can step in and take action. Corporates and governments are influenced by the actions and wants and needs of individuals, but we have to act as a collective with a powerful voice to get there. And the IPCC, who put out reports each year, last year, for the first time recognised that individual action between now and 2050 will account for 40 to 70% of the emissions reductions. But how do we actually do that? Because day to day, it doesn't sit top of mind. We have barriers to action. It's not an easy thing to do. We have knowledge gaps. So this is where I'm going to start our little story. So I've got a family of beautiful wife and 4 kids. I'm English, my wife's Aussie. I've got 4 little Aussie kids. They're all surfers and stuff that I didn't grow up with in England, so it's quite confusing. I grew up with cricket, unfortunately, so yes, you know, I was awake a little bit last night. We had this moment. My background's marketing, by the way, media. Ran a media agency with Media Brands for a number of years. Stepped out to write the bid and bring the Invictus Games to Australia, which was an amazing journey, actually. Really powerful story of how connecting corporate, government, not-for-profits, community groups around a common purpose can really shift a narrative and make change in communities and for groups of people. And that drove me forwards into a bunch of things. But a couple of years ago, the 5 of us sat down and watched A Life on Our Planet by David Attenborough. I don't know if any of you have seen that. Very powerful for me being an Englishman, because I grew up on sort of soggy Sunday afternoons watching David Attenborough documentaries, and it was inspiring, beautiful footage from around the world and how great the world was. And all of a sudden, he was slapping me around the face saying, "This is what we're doing to the planet. We must do something. There's still a bit of time, but not much, but we must do something." And I have to say, that was my kind of climate epiphany, holy shit moment. I was looking at my then 14-year-old, Archie's the one in the hat there, now 17, in the eye, thinking, what on earth do you think when you hear concepts of tipping points? It scared the hell out of me. So we had a chat at the dinner table that night, and it went, I won't go through the whole thing, but ultimately we made a pledge. We said the Hodgson household will be net zero by 2025. And I took a deep breath and I was like, oh my God, what does that mean? We haven't done anything. Like the feelings of guilt and fear and anxiety were sitting in me, but we hadn't done anything as a family. So we walked away from that dinner and I didn't tell anyone because it's one of those New Year's resolution kind of things that you don't feel like you can necessarily stick to. So I kind of kept it quiet for a few months, but I went on a journey. And the journey started with kind of where you think it might start, which is carbon calculators. So I don't know if any of you have been online and done individual carbon calculators, but they are designed to confuse. And I've done 20 to 30 of them, I'd say, over the years, and I dip in every now and then just because you can learn something out of them each time. But I was getting one telling me I was 4 tons a year of carbon emissions, up to 40 tons on the bottom right there a year of carbon emissions. If you really want to go through them all, everything in between, you have to read all the assumptions, kind of like, you know, it was one of the 3 core things I'd say that was paralyzing me into inaction. This carbon science was one, not knowing where to start, kind of another that you hear the whole time. And this sort of narrative of doom and gloom, it actually can, you know, for some people it drags you forwards, for some people it pushes you back. But this wasn't helping. The one thing that this did do for me was it helped me understand what the core actions I needed to take, because they start measuring, you know, against certain things. And so this goes back to the kitchen table with the kids, cutting things out on pieces of paper and boxing them under particular categories. And we looked at it from what I learned. We had 14 actions starting from 0 to get to net zero, or our net zero. These were the actions we needed to take under in orange there, energy, green, food and waste, blue, travel, red, financing, and the black there is sort of about your general consumption habits, really. And so that was all very interesting. We wrote them down and put them there, and then you've still got that where do you start thing, and that just, you know, we'd said net zero by 2025. By the way, we plucked that completely out of the air. There was no science to that at the time. Once we did the 14 actions, 2025 made sense because it felt like, you know, 3 a year or whatever it is, you know, we'll get it's about right. Let's give it a go. But you need it in a narrative, right? And you know what it's like when you are at work and you're given a project plan or a project by your boss, and it keeps you awake at night until you've done a project plan and work back schedule and you've delegated some stuff and you've put some dates on it. That's what reduces the anxiety. This actually reduced our eco-anxiety considerably, funny enough. But it had a narrative for us. So I had always wanted to get solar on our roof. We're lucky we have a rooftop. Not everyone can get solar on their roof, but there are other actions that everyone can take. But we could, right? And I'd said it for 3 years, let's get solar, hadn't got round to it. You know, we all go through that, putting stuff off. It costs money. My barriers were, you know, perceived 10K that it would cost us to put it on the roof, and that I didn't know who the reputable suppliers were out there. You know, I just sensed there were a bunch of sharks out there, possibly growing business, small businesses, selling something, chuck it on your roof, move on. And that's why I hadn't done it. So I said, right, we're going to do it this year, and we'll commit to that. If I go through, I won't go through all of these, but our energy-related journey here is, then in 2022, we were going to have a year where we weren't going to invest too much money on our side, but we'd do stuff that matters. So we'd switch providers away from energy providers, away from those that have coal-fired power stations. We would offset the remaining energy after our solar through renewable energy certificates. So we're technically net zero in our energy, but offsetting is a strategy that you need to get to understand a bit better. It's great if it's done well in parallel to emissions reduction strategies, but it can't be the thing that you fall back on and the only thing that you do. 2023, so this year, and this is exactly where I'm at right now, is we have some gas appliances in our house that we need to electrify, so our oven and our water heater and our heating generally, not that we have much. I spend most of the winter in that little puffer jacket sitting on the sofa at home. Banking and super is really important. Where your money goes, you can care about the world as much as you care about the world, and you can earn some money and put it in a bank or into super who are investing it in fossil fuels, and it is one of the most important things you can do. I have literally just remortgaged from a bank that invests in fossil fuels into one that doesn't, and it's saving me 1% on my mortgage. So it's like a win-win, right? And it's actually supporting some of the electrification stuff that I'm doing. 2024 then, I put a battery back then because my sense was it'd be good to have the ecosystem of everything electric before we invest in a battery, and batteries are coming down in price. And then switch to the EV in 2025. We've now got the ecosystem that we can charge an EV. We don't need a vehicle till 2025. And I'm hoping there are some second-hand ones, because I'm not a sort of a new car buyer. I'm a real second-hand buyer. I have 4 kids. I can't afford a new car. So that's the journey, right? Now everything else falls in around it. And the most important thing we did was stick it on the fridge. And the reason that was the most important thing was because now we'd seen that we could do it, we needed to commit to it externally, to ourselves. You know, the Facebook post to say what your New Year's resolution is was out there. You know, we were out there, we were going to do this. But really the most important thing was that it promoted conversations with friends that came around to the house. And there were friends who had done nothing, who would virtually all say, I'm super concerned, but I don't know where to start. And there were friends that had done a lot of stuff who could unlock my barriers. So a friend came around for the solar, gave me a provider called Solar Quotes. If anyone's looking for solar, helps you. They've vetted all the credible solar businesses out there, and they have 3 on your doorstep to give you quotes within a week or so, and a financing business that finances solar on your rooftop. And we had it on our rooftop within 6 weeks, and it just got us going right. But people were further on the journey than me, and it helped build a little bit of a community of friends and then extended friends who started taking photos of this and putting it on their own fridge, which was lovely, right? You know, it felt great. We were doing something. We were in there. We were part of the solution now rather than frustrated bystanders, and we were moving forwards. But the reality is, it's not changing a great deal unless we can scale this, right? How do we scale this? How do we go from corporates and governments taking action, but people coming in behind it? You know, everyone's got a role to play. Corporates have to divest. They have to build infrastructure. Governments have to divest and build infrastructure. Corporates have to innovate, build commercial models around this. Us as individuals, we each have different capacities and resources to be able to get involved in this, but we've all got to do what we can and adopt the solutions at a rate that we can individually adopt these solutions. That's the only way, only way through it. And 6 summers is, in 6 summers' time, we are at 2030. By 2030, we need to halve the emissions that we put out on this planet. They're still going up. 6 summers. It's one more Ashes series in England. It's so soon, it's ridiculous. And so that kind of drove me forwards to use my network and work out what was going on in the corporate world. And in the corporate world, you can see some wonderful stuff, right? Here in Australia, we're not tightly regulated enough. It's a little bit loose still, but it's coming. But there are organisations who are stepping in passionately with great people trying to do good stuff. But the way organisations tend to work is that they will divide their emissions up between 3 scopes. I won't go into the science of this, for many of you will know it, but scope 1, generally those direct emissions like your fleet of cars. Scope 2, your office, your indirect that you buy in, things like your energy emissions in your office. Scope 3 is the really hard one. It's like your business partners, value chain that you can influence, or through procurement over time, make sure that your ecosystem is getting towards net zero. But I was seeing all these amazing organizations with these amazing plans like Microsoft, who are, have this incredible pledge, real leadership to draw down through offsetting every gram of carbon that's they've ever emitted into the atmosphere since day 1 of Microsoft by 2045, and everything in between, right? But they've got 200,000 people coming into work, and they've got a huge amount of knowledge that they're investing in internally in sustainability that can support those people. But those people are going home at night and not changing anything. And that's what was really frustrating me. It's this power of the sphere of influence to actually make a bigger change in the world than getting to net zero. Net zero is the hygiene. Net zero allows us to stay where we're at right now. Where we're at right now is we're just about to break through some of these planetary boundaries that deliver, a future of huge uncertainty for our children and grandchildren. We need to go beyond that into this sort of concept of positive pursuits. We need a net positive future. And that's the theme that you'll see in organisations around the world in the next 5 or 6 years, because we haven't done the net zero drive early enough, unfortunately. So how do we scale? I was seeing it through organisations. We ended up having a wonderful chat with an employee engagement business called LiveTiles, who have built technology, intranets, user engagement platforms to reach people, connect people in organisations. And we ended up buddying up together to work out how we can shift behaviours of people in organisations. The reality is my background was B2C. So I was always about marketing through, putting KFC into cricket and reaching an audience through that. And how do you do that? It was great. I used to love it. But actually shifting behaviour change directly to consumers is very hard. It's not impossible. Very hard. Takes a lot of money and influence. But doing it within organisational structures where you've got leadership, you've got mission and vision, you've got culture, you've got belonging, you've got the desire for affiliation and status, you've got HR benefits and perks, all these kind of things. You've got a playing field you can set that can drive people and support people to take the action that they want to take. Seem to be the way to go. So fast forward, and this is my net zero side, I promise. This is where we're at now. What we do is we go into organisations to help them understand what their people want and then deliver against it. We're effectively helping reduce your employee-related carbon emissions. So within those scopes, there are a few employee-related carbon emissions that organisations are committing to around the world. One is employee commuting and also work from home, which is obviously much more relevant these days than it used to be. If you think about the kind of office emissions, the energy use in an office, and now a lot of us are working from home, it's actually been displaced into our home. And so helping organisations to reduce those emissions through employees, but also helping organisations to support their people to take action in their own lives. So listening to them about what they've done, what they'd like to do, what their aspirations are, what their barriers are, and what support they'd like is really important. Building an employee climate action plan is really important strategically internally. How do you plug that into your internal comms? How do you market to your own people? What's your superpower to support them? And then providing a platform that lets people do exactly what we did on the fridge, but actually, a bit more Trello-esque, digitized, a little bit smarter. So once you've built your platform, once you've built your roadmap, it individualizes the platform so that you're being driven the content that actually educates you on what you want to do this year. So for me, electrification and banking and those things. But also the marketplace solutions that are out there that can help you get there faster. So super important. When I think about you guys, your people-led business and your people-led industry, the opportunity to ripple that out to a significant audience in this country and around the world is amazing. Creative, you have influence, your comm specialists. It's a great opportunity, I sense, to go out there and drive impact over and above the emissions that sit within your individual organisations. And so I urge you to have a think about how you might do that in your own businesses, because the world needs it moving forwards. And this quote drives me forwards. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. I'd love you all to go home from today and just have a think about that little bit extra we can do. It is the only way we can do this if everyone thinks about the little bit extra, the extra 1%, 2%, what we can do as individuals and what we can do as organisations. And then, there's a lot of hope out there. It feels sometimes like doom and gloom drives me forwards, but there's a lot of hope. There's so many great people doing great things. There is a positive tipping point in all this, but we've got to get to that positive tipping point as fast as we possibly can. Thank you so much for having me in here. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Joe.